Welcome to Faith and Politics, a show dedicated to discussing issues surrounding the intersection of church, state, and politics, and the examination of whether you're allowing your faith to shape your politics or are your politics starting to shape your faith. In other words, what do you do when God and government come face to face? I'm your host, Orlin Johnson. Let me introduce you to our guest panelists for today. First, we have Dr. Nia Johnson, assistant professor at Wake Forest Law School. We have Ms. Bettina Krause, who's the editor of Liberty Magazine. We have Mr. Andre Wong, general counsel of the North Pacific Union Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we have Dr. Timothy Golden, who's a professor of philosophy at Whitman College. Ladies and gentlemen, great having you here with us and looking forward to our conversation for today. You know, the Department of Justice seems to be stepping up its defense of religious liberty under the Trump administration. Over the past several months, we've seen the DOJ file statements of interest in land use cases for church. They've helped to launch a task force to eliminate anti-Christian bias. They opened up investigations into anti-Catholic law in the state of Washington. You know, the DOJ seems to be opening up even to fighting law firms nowadays and telling them that you can't be allowed to even represent certain clients. They're even getting involved in cases where they're telling Catholic priests what they have to disclose. You know, when you take a look at what's going on in the Department of Justice, which for many people don't seem to understand, they are not actually the law firm for the President of the United States. They're actually a law firm for the American people. And we're starting to look that we are seeing all kinds of activities that are taking place, questions regarding what you can do at churches, whether or not there's really only anti-Christian bias. Should we be thinking about other religious groups? But the reality is that this current administration seems to be looking to really engage more in protection of religious activity. Now, Andre, as a religious person, I kind of like the idea of protection, but when I look at this from a legal perspective and what we are trying to, I think, maintain the separation of church and state, does this start to create a lot of confusion where people aren't clear what side of this argument they really want to be on?
Yeah, so Orlin, all of this is really no surprise. The president expressly campaigned as a candidate at both times, as a candidate that would protect people of faith from government overreach and ensure that individuals and institutions could freely exercise their religious beliefs. So let's make no mistake. Yes, both people of faith and religious organizations enjoy the highest level of religious freedom and protection under this administration. But yeah, the main question here is are the administration's actions blurring the line? They're blurring the line between church and state, especially when policies appear to favor Christianity over other religions, potentially violating, presenting an Establishment Clause issue. So the president's emphasis here on religious values, Christian values, actually in public policy and rhetoric, really is alienating to people of other faiths and obviously people of no faith. But my point here is that religious liberty cannot be invoked selectively. Religious freedom applies to all, not just beliefs that align with specific political or ideological agendas.
Andre is absolutely right. I mean, today, religious liberty is a contested term. I mean, people disagree what religious liberty is, what it looks like. And so the question, is the Trump administration defending religious liberty? Well, you know, you just got to define your terms. You know, religious liberty for some people is simply code for Christian privilege. But then on the other hand, you know, religious liberty, I don't think, should be seen as like just sweeping away any sort of religious freedom claim simply because it's made by a Christian. And so religious liberty is sort of in this moment, in this cultural moment, it's a contested term. I will be convinced that the Trump administration is truly stepping up to the plate when it comes to religious liberty, when its efforts on behalf of Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, Muslims, atheists are of the same caliber and enthusiasm as its efforts on behalf of Christians.
Yes. And I also want to add, even going back to like the earliest point, I'm not sure that the president understands that the DOJ is not his personal law firm either, right? This is why it's important to have people in government who understand what government is actually supposed to do. But, the Trump administration not only ran on, a premise of protecting religious liberty, but they also ran choosing to tear down a culture or to win a culture war, right? And so we can't have this conversation about religious liberty and the Trump administration's intention without talking about the cultural war that they decided to win by tearing down diversity, by, disrupting the rights of trans people and LGBTQ populations more broadly. This is what he ran upon. And I think it's really important to talk about, backlash, right? Like this is something that legal theorists have talked about for a while, even going as far back as Brown v. Board of Education and other major events, when wherever there has been a significant amount of progress for a group that is not in the mainstream, usually a very significant backlash tends to follow, right? So we get Ronald Reagan after the civil rights movement. It's no accident that after we see, landmark rulings on the behalf of gay marriage and lesbian marriage and, really large strides or potential strides during the 2020s for Black Americans when it came to police brutality, naturally there would be a candidate who capitalized on everybody who didn't think that those were well earned and galvanized the American population. The easiest way to gather white American votes in this country, and political scientists have long documented this, is by creating racial resentment, right? And what Donald Trump has done has actually spun that even further and turned that into a cultural resentment with Christianity at the center. And so truly, I think a lot of this is actually very disingenuous. And the key for Christian folks is to remember not to cheer for these things, right? This doesn't just alienate, atheists and, groups who are of other religious beliefs. It alienates Christians who don't necessarily think this is right. But within our congregations, there are many people who believe this is exactly what should be happening, right? We've always wanted an environment that would stop the cultural change within our denomination and, make the world look more in our likeness, right? And so we have to be, cognizant and remind people we should not be celebrating this. This is not religious liberty. This is not an inclusive mode of religious liberty. And we have to hold people accountable. Otherwise, we're going to be cheering for the wrong things and eventually be on the wrong side of history.
President Trump, and I just want to say I totally agree with everything that's been said. In particular, Bettina's point, I love the phraseology of religious liberty being a contested term, for sure. President Trump has made his political career out of exploiting the election of Barack Obama to appeal to the racist sensibilities of a large portion of the electorate. And what he has been able to do in the context of these religious freedom issues that we're talking about is he has been able to selectively, to use Andre's term, single out a certain kind of Christianity for legal protection. And this is what we're going to protect. And it just so happens that that sort of Christianity has a deep resonance with white Christian nationalism, right? And so it's difficult for me to take anything this president does seriously or his administration does seriously on religious freedom, because he's talking about a certain kind of religious freedom that frankly is anathema to an egalitarian view of religion in which you protect Eastern religions and their expression as much as you would protect Western monotheisms. I seriously doubt that Trump has Islam in mind when he's talking about protecting religious freedom, right? And so it's important, I think, for people to understand that what the president is doing is trying to maintain and leverage political power by appealing to a certain kind of Christianity that is fundamentally morally corrupt and racist at its core.
But Andre, the president of the United States is not the leader of a church, right? He's not an individual who's trying to figure out how to, get my membership where I want them to be from a viewpoint. However, he is a politician. And politicians do look for groupings that they can kind of like connect with. And the mere fact that you find this group that you think will be supportive when you engage in certain activities, is it really surprising that, to the victor goes the spoils? If I win, I appoint the people who have the viewpoints that probably will allow me to connect with more of my quote unquote constituency. To some degree, I kind of get, well, maybe this isn't what's at the top of the food chain in his mind. But the mere fact that he decides, well, there's a group I think I can, be connected with in a better way by doing more of this. I mean, isn't this just politics being politics?
Every elected official, or I would even say as a failed candidate for public office myself, you have a constituency of people who you're seeking to represent, but also the constituency that you're seeking to elect you. And Donald Trump owes his election to a constituency of faith-based evangelicals. This is now what is the base of where this is all coming from. We're seeing a record number of faith-based government initiatives coming out of the White House. The Department of Justice memo, the famous memo on religious liberty guidance that's in the Attorney General's office about not about the protection of religious liberty, but really the promotion of religion in areas of government. And then also the recent establishment of the Commission on Religious Liberty. So it's not surprising that the president's fingerprints on religion and specifically Christianity is all over this administration.
Can I just sound a note of caution here? Because it's one thing to talk about this in terms of broad political and cultural movements. And I share the concerns of all that have been expressed by everyone here on this panel. But I think we need to be very, very careful that we do not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Religious freedom and the principle of religious freedom is infinitely valuable. And if you doubt that, just go outside the culture war bubble that we currently occupy and take a look at how religious freedom is dealt with in different parts of the world. So let's not get caught up too far, I think, in trying to paint everything in culture war issues. Religious freedom, even for privileged Christians, is important. It's an important principle. And so I think we need to discuss this in a more nuanced way than just simply say, this is a culture war issue, privileged Christianity is bad, therefore no religious freedom claims made by them have any merit.
I don't think anybody is saying that here, but I think what's key is remembering that, first of all, this is a president who has been disingenuous in many of his claims and also doesn't really align with the religion himself, especially not the religion of the base that he's with. And on top of that the version of Christianity that's being promoted is not only one that's been hostile to others, but also is one that has basically said that everybody who is not like them is against them. And so we have to be mindful of what we celebrate, even if it seems like it's helping us.
Well, I think that the celebration of what we see is where we do have to be cautious, because it's easy to celebrate when it aligns with what your personal viewpoints are. But when we start to see something that does not align with your personal viewpoint, you don't get to push back aggressively when you were already in line when you thought it was working to your benefit. But I think the long and the short of this is we want to make sure that we see religion protected, but protected in a way in which it's being used really as a shield as opposed to being used as a sword. In the case of Kloosterman versus Metropolitan Hospital, we find an individual who is third-generation family member to be working at a local healthcare system. Ms. Kloosterman served here in this community for over 17 years for Michigan Health. She regularly received exemplary reviews. Her supervisors called her professional, very ethical, and a pleasure to work with. She treated all of her patients respectfully, regardless of their background, sexual orientation, or any declared gender. But then the University of Michigan Health System took over her clinic. And not too long ago, after a mandatory diversity and inclusion training, she asked for a religious accommodation because she could not affirm statements about gender that violated her Christian beliefs, nor could she participate by referring patients for sex-obscuring surgeries or using pronouns that conflicted with human biology. You know, Nia, you've done a lot of work in healthcare. And one of the things that's interesting here is we have a healthcare organization that gets taken over by another healthcare organization. They start calling Kloosterman evil and blaming her for all kinds of things simply because she has a personal belief. When you try to juxtapose making sure you're doing what's in the best interest of somebody from a healthcare perspective, but then you have your own religious beliefs, how does the combination of that work, whether it's legal or even from a policy perspective?
I mean, this is a really challenging situation, and there's so many different healthcare issues happening here. One of which is that, you know, a smaller community institution has been acquired by a major academic medical system, right? Which has pros for a community because it means that they're more likely to have better technology. They're able to access other points of care that have higher level of skills than they may have in their community organization. But on the other hand, that means that you may be held to a standard that is a little bit different than what is allowed to happen in your community healthcare institution. Additionally, we're also getting into like some of the foggier areas around theology and gender affirming care, which are also quite challenging. So from a scientific standpoint, there have been a number of, researchers and scientists that have been essentially 50-50 on gender affirming care, not on gender affirming care in pronouns and, using age appropriate care, but more so when we talk about sex reassignment surgery and some of those other clinical operations. And then to go even further, the idea that, using somebody's preferred pronouns is automatically a violation of your Christian beliefs. There's a lot to be said about, where theology intersects with those issues. For example, there are some theologians that say, like, even if there are some issues, quote unquote, with gay marriage, there may not be necessarily when we talk about sex reassignment surgery, using pronouns and other things. And a lot of Christians jump leaps and bounds to roll that all together. And so now you have somebody who basically has a new employer and is being told to be somebody that they fundamentally are not. And I think that sets up a moment for conflict. Obviously, the University of Michigan is very interested in demonstrating to their clientele, which is world renowned, that we support everybody. And going back to some of the things that we've even said earlier in this show, you have corporations that care about the moral stances they're making to their community. And when you talk about something as intimate as healthcare, unfortunately, that does matter, right? You're taking somebody's body into their hands and they want to know that everybody who's working on their team is not going to sabotage, what they have asked their providers to do. Now, I do think that University of Michigan does have a discrimination case on their hands, if for no other reason but for the fact that they take federal funds, not only through NIH dollars, but also through being an academic medical institution. So they have, residents, like student loans, like all of these different things come together here. So I do think that they are going to have a really hard time with this. But I also think that the intricacies of healthcare are very challenging. And some of this really goes back to how we teach about evangelism. On one hand, we are not saying that you have to leave your religion at the door when you go to your job. But on the other hand, sometimes scientific advancements may get a little bit further than what you're learning from the pew. And there have to be ways to respond to that. And ultimately, I mean, this is just really unfortunate because much of this was supposed to be a good thing. And then it really just went awry.
It's really interesting, Nia. I agree with you wholeheartedly. This is just a tricky situation.
Yeah.
But I think this case demonstrates really, really well one of the fundamental problems that we are facing today, and that is discomfort with dissenting viewpoints. I mean, we no longer see people who believe differently from us, who have different moral viewpoints from us, as folks that we just don't agree with. We see them as evil. We see them as unacceptable. We see them as beyond the pale. And this is an intolerance and illiberalism that is coming from both the right and the left. Stepping back a few paces, the genius of the American Republic, of our whole civic system, is that it doesn't necessarily forge consensus on every issue. It mediates dissent. It allows folks with hugely different worldviews to participate together in the civic space. We talk about in politics the Overton window, this range of ideas that are acceptable in the mainstream that we can talk about. More and more, we are shrinking the Overton window, and we're saying, you have a view of same-sex marriage that is unacceptable to me, therefore you are now excluded from the mainstream. And we see that on both the right and the left, shrinking the range of acceptable viewpoints. Now, coming back to the case here, could there be a common sense solution that could have been worked out to accommodate this woman's religious beliefs in a way that didn't compromise the professionalism of the environment in which she worked? I have no doubt there was probably a very common sense solution. But in the environment that we find ourselves in today, common sense solutions, which come from talking to each other and accepting we have different points of view, those solutions tend to be off the table.
Yeah, I think this is a case about the real tension between knowledge and revelation, right? There is what science tells us, as Nia pointed out. Things in the very nature of induction is that our knowledge of the world is never complete, right? Yeah. So we learn more and more as we go forward. I think we had to adjust our view of the solar system not too long ago because astronomers concluded that Pluto was not a planet. And so I grew up learning that there were 9 planets, and now I guess there's only 8, right? So, and I love the way Nia phrased it, where she said science moves a little faster than the pew, right? But nonetheless, we still have beliefs. And I think Bettina's point is really well taken because she talks about extremism on the left and the right, and she's right about that. But I think at some point we have to move beyond, especially if we are true religious people who believe in something beyond this world. You have to move from left and right to right and wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And we have to start talking about morality more and a little less about politics and ideology. And in that context, I think Bettina's also right that the real genius of the American Republic is to find a way to mediate this dissent, because this is a difficult case. This is not easy, right? You have an academic healthcare system that has values, and you have this individual who is facing that system, who works for that system, that says, wait a minute, I have values too.
Yeah.
And they don't align with yours. There's a French philosopher and literary theorist, Jacques Derrida, who makes the point that in America, democracy is never here. It's always deferred. It's always to come. It's always sort of on its way. Justice is never here. It's always to come. It's always on its way. And the reason why is because of tensions like this that on the surface appear to be problematic, but that are actually quite healthy and nourish American democracy.
But Andre, isn't this the struggle right here? We're looking for someone to mediate dissension. And from a legal perspective, when a mediator is involved, it's somebody that supposedly comes to the table with no quote unquote, movement to know where they want to be. They're supposed to have no, premonitions from either side. But it doesn't seem like we can find neutral mediators anymore, that even those who are called to mediate seem to have already picked a side before it even begins.
Yeah, it's a basic rule of negotiation that you want to establish what is it you want from both sides, and then move to some sort of resolution. Going back, kind of to a 30,000 foot level on this, we've lost the concept of civility in our culture and in society. The basic root word of civility is from civilis, the Greek word civilis, which means citizen. by its very nature, of civility, we need to treat each other as individuals with the inherent dignity and respect that we all have to our viewpoints. And in this case, Ms. Kloosterman argued that it wasn't just her non-accommodation of her freedom of conscience or sincerely held beliefs, but that her employer exhibited hostility towards her beliefs in the workplace.
Yeah.
And so, the whole idea of trying to reach some sort of resolution 20, 30 years ago, that would have been the norm. Let's work this out. But yeah, with the polarization of where we are, not only in general society but now in the workplace, is really troubling.
But Andre, do you mind if I just actually jump in and say something here? 20, 30 years ago, trans folks would not have been invited into the healthcare system at all, and they also would have been misgendered, right? So we're now in a stage where the terms of engagement of equality are shifting, very similar to the desegregation of hospitals. So the idea that, civility has automatically gone out the window, yes, in many cases, that's the truth, and this woman should not have been called evil by her job. But also, we have a group of people, especially religious folks, who don't necessarily know well how to integrate into society in respectful manners either. So, I do think we have to put this in context. This is not something that would have come up 20, 30 years ago because these people were forced onto the margins of society. And so as we're integrating people out of the margins, now we have to come up with a new set of rules regarding how we treat people and how to be respectful to them, even if we don't agree.
And I have to let that be the last word. And I think what we've got to figure out is how do you find a way where common sense can be utilized, even though we don't have common points of view, and getting to a point where we can be respectful of one another, in particular when you've been somebody who's been good at your job, is something I think we've got to figure out a better way to handle. Hey, Bettina, tell me something I don't know.
We've just been talking about Michigan. Did you know, Orland, that there is a town in Michigan called Hell? And yes, it does freeze over every winter.
Nia, tell me something I don't know.
So did you know that most MAGA supporters of Donald Trump do not actually think that mRNA vaccines are unsafe? It's actually something very different. They simply do not feel that they have enough information to understand whether they are safe or not.
Andre, tell me something I don't know.
The 2026 midterm elections for Congress, we are seeing a record number of members of Congress fleeing the federal legislature. We are seeing record numbers of retirements, but also people running for governor of their state. 10 representatives and 1 senator.
Wow. Tim Golden, tell me something I don't know.
Ida B. Wells, the 19th century and early 20th century political activist, openly debated Miss Frances Willard of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, accusing her and the temperance movement of anti-Black misandric aggression, using the temperance movement as a pretext to exclude Black men from getting the right to vote before white women.
Wow. Always learn something new. Looking forward to doing this one more time. And thank you again for being with us. Hope you enjoyed our conversation. Just remember, if it's about God and government, it's faith and politics. See you next time.